Right, back live with you tonight, John in Focus. Let's get some understanding of these laws there. Let's speak to legal researcher Mbekezeli Benjamin, who's joining us now. Mbekezeli, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. I mean, I'll start again. Let's talk about some of the basic laws and leave the parties and the politics. They'll go back and forth in the courts and deal with that. But Section 46, what does it say in terms of what a composition is of the National Assembly, in terms of the institution, right? And then what does it mean in terms of composition, in terms of the functioning now, the body itself, and what it needs to do? Please unmute there. I think you're muted for.
I'm so sorry. Yes. Good evening, Mr. Mdluli, and good evening to the viewers. Well, yeah, that's a really important question. And I love that you mentioned composition, which is an important thing. And there's also a discussion about quorum, but we'll get to that. So composition is in terms of Section 46 of the Constitution. And Section 46 has two parts. The first part, Section 46(1), says that the National Assembly is made up or comprised of a minimum of 350 members and a maximum of 400 members.
Yeah.
And then it goes on in Section 46(2), the second part of Section 46, is that an Act of Parliament determines the formula for how we get to the exact number of members of National Assembly. So Section 46, we have to read it in totality. We can't read one section and leave the other section out. And that Act of Parliament that Section 46(2) speaks about is the Electoral Act. The Electoral Act was passed in 1998 to govern how the National Assembly is comprised of and how the elections will be run. And what it says in terms of Section 114 and Schedule 1A of the Act, it says, the National Assembly is made up, its members are determined by a formula of, for 100,000 South Africans, there is one member of parliament. So as soon as our population got to 40 million, we could only have 400 members on the National Assembly. We can't have less, we can't have more. We have to get to the maximum because that's our population size. That has been an act that has been applied for the last 25 years without any disputes.
Yeah.
And so when the IEC announced the results on Sunday, they announced which parties got which share of the vote. And secondly, they announced how many seats does each party get of the total of 400,
right.
Because the IEC was working off the numbers of 400, which is why the MK party got 58, the ANC got 159, the DA got 88, and the other parties. So that is how we get to the 400 members of parliament. So that composition stands. Whether or not people attend on a particular day that parliament is sitting, there is a different issue related to the issue of quorum. But composition is 400, nothing less.
So then the next question becomes, what constitutes a member? Because that, as you put it, the composition really is speaking about the institution, that this is what it needs to look like. But at this particular point, you have a picture of the institution and what it needs to look like, and it now needs to be populated by members. And so who becomes then a member?
So the people who become members of parliament are the people who were submitted by their political parties when the political parties submitted their candidate lists in March. You'll remember in March, by 8th of March, all political parties had to submit lists of candidates. And all of those people were running to be members of parliament. Each party submitted 200 members on the national list, 200 members on the regional list. The possibility was that each one of those members could possibly be one day be a member of parliament.
Yeah.
So that is how it is determined. And when the IEC declares the election results and declares the seat that each party gets, each of the seats is allocated to the individual who was nominated by their political party. So the MK party has 58 seats. It listed 58 people on its candidate list. It actually listed more than 58. It listed 200. But the top 58 on the candidate list for the MK party will be the members who represent the MK party. And from the 2nd of June, those people were duly elected members of the National Assembly. The only thing that they now need to do is to be sworn in. But swearing in doesn't mean that you are less of a member or more of a member. What swearing in does, and what Section 48 says, is that members of the National Assembly swear or take an oath of office in order to perform their functions. So if you could look at it on a normal employment context, the declaration of the election results on the 2nd of June was essentially the IEC giving these people their appointment letters. What they'll be doing on Friday is they'll be signing their employment contracts.
Yes.
That is how it functions. And then, from today, even, they are members of the National Assembly.
So the argument now is that there is a constitutional requirement to be sworn in first before you are a member. And therefore, if that has not happened, that National Assembly is not constituted properly. Because how can it if the members have not taken the oath?
Well, that unfortunately is a misreading of the Constitution, because Section 48 of the Constitution speaks about the oath of office. And it says only members may swear an oath of office. By saying that only members, it means that you are already a member, but you must take an oath of office in order to perform your functions. And what are those functions? The functions of a member of the National Assembly is to vote on a particular issue, is to debate issues on the floor, is to bring information to the floor of the National Assembly, is to interrogate government and other entities when they come before the National Assembly. All of those functions you perform once you've taken the oath of office, but it doesn't mean that you are not a member of the National Assembly. You are a member. All you need to do is to sign your contract with the people of South Africa. And that contract is your oath of office to say you will abide by the Constitution of South Africa. And once you've signed that contract, then you can start doing your job and performing the functions.
Let's look at the first sitting then. Is there a constitutionally prescribed minimum number of sworn-in members that need to be at that first sitting to be able to perform those functions? 1, of electing a speaker, 2, of electing a deputy speaker, 3, of nominating and electing a president?
Yes, there is a number that is required. And here we turn to Section 53 of the Constitution. And what that section says is that for the National Assembly to take its decisions, for the National Assembly to be able to take legally binding decisions, it needs a certain minimum number of members to be present. And that is what we call the quorum. And that minimum number for the National Assembly to pass laws, it needs a minimum of 50% plus 1. And 50% plus 1 is 201 members. But for any other business, unless the Constitution specifically requires it, for any other business, you only need a third of the members of the National Assembly to be present. That means you only need 134 members. Any other business in this context would include the election of the president, the election of the Speaker of the National Assembly. Those decisions need at least a third of the members of the National Assembly to be present, and that is the 134 members. So that is the only quorum requirement that is required for Friday. And in fact, the Constitution, all over the Constitution, there are different quorum requirements. For example, to impeach the public protector or to impeach a judge, you need a 2/3 majority. 2/3 majority or 2/3 member of parliament is 267. So that is a higher requirement. But for passing laws, you just need 201. But for any other business, including the election of the president, you only need 134. So the point is, whether the 58 members of the MK party attend on Friday or they don't attend, it does not affect the business of the National Assembly. The National Assembly can still continue to elect a speaker and elect the president.
Is this a matter that could likely see the interdict being successful, the interdict of the first sitting?
So the interdict is a different issue, but the short answer is the interdict is unlikely to succeed. I heard you earlier speaking to Mr. Ndlela about what the MK party is arguing in their interdict application. And what they are asking for is for the Constitutional Court to pause the sitting of Parliament once they clear up the issue of the result in the voting. The result in the voting, the way that you challenge the results in the voting, and your question about whether they brought the evidence to the IEC, is because Section 55 of the Electoral Act says that they must start at the IEC. They must raise an objection, and the IEC must deal with the objection based on the evidence that the party has submitted. If the IEC dismisses that objection and the party is not happy with the IEC's decision, the next step is to go to the Electoral Court. And the Electoral Court, you are required, in terms of Section 55(3), you're required to go to the Electoral Court within 3 days of the decision of the IEC. That decision was on Sunday. So the MK party or any other party that had an objection to the results had until Wednesday last week to go to the Electoral Court. From the MK's papers in the Constitutional Court, they don't seem to have gone to the Electoral Court. So it would be interesting to see on what basis then do they ask the Constitutional Court to set the elections aside. And that for me is the reason why I don't see this court application succeeding.
Mbekezeli Benjamin, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on and giving us your interpretation then of how these things are to be read as far as the Constitution and the Act of Parliament.